Catus, Maximus here. Alright, let's try and get through this. Been waiting a while to do an updated 3/4 inch drive socket drawer. I think a long time ago when I got, a couple, 3 years ago when I got this toolbox, I kind of showed how I had this top drawer organized and it holds all my 3/4 inch stuff. Now it has it all. Forgot about my Sweeney 3/4 inch breaker bar. It also has the overflow of my 1/2 inch drive extensions because they don't fit anywhere else. So that's what all these little extensions. I just have tons of random ones. You know, impact swivels. We have some of like these old Harbor Freight 1/2 inch to 3/8 inch impact in case you really need tight access, which I actually kind of like, as well as any random ones that I found, like an old Craftsman USA here. We do have some Williams. Really like these old Williams mainly because they have these really thick drive ends. What do we got down here? More Williams. I actually need to sort through all these extensions because I obviously have way too many. Even for me, hoarding extensions isn't... I've always been about like breaker bars and ratchets as opposed to extensions. So I have more extensions than I care for. We do have like the old Harbor Freight locking extensions. I use those every once in a while. Did forget about this. This is an old school Armstrong. Really don't see many of these old style Armstrongs, but I was kind of stoked to have found that. And you know, I have other random ones like a snap-on here. So I have enough like nice grade ones. What is this? I think this is an SK. Yeah, it is. It's an old Diamond logo SK. Come on, camera. You can do it. There we go. There we go, finally. And so I have enough nice random ones where I really don't need quite so many duplicates here. Although the more I think about it, the less I think I really have in duplicates. Because I've tried to pay attention to that, so unless it was like an old snap-on or an Armstrong, I wouldn't pick up many. This is like a 10-inch Sunex impact extension. So generally what we have going on here. I have a few random 3/4 inch 6-point impact deep wells. They go along with, I have for a long time just had a short set of the 3/4 6-point impact deep wells, and so I think like Viver sent me a set and I kept a few of the sockets that could fill this out, and I need to reorganize this drawer to kind of line them up. And then for cheap, sold the rest of the sockets on Craigslist. I do have some random sockets here. Just when I saw them, I thought they were cool, such as this, which I believe may be a railroad socket. This is a 1-inch 8-point. So this is really designed for work on 4-point or square nuts and fasteners. The sockets just commonly have 8 points to make them a lot easier to deal with. 3/4 inch drive, but this thing is just super thick. Just mega thick walls. It is an absolute beast. I have some random deep wells here. Obviously with 3/4 inch drive it's much more expensive, a lot less of it's sold. As far as 3/4 inch sockets, like here's just a chrome proto deep well. Yeah, this is a 1 3/16. Not the most common size. So like these sets here are the metric and fractional Harbor Freights, and then when I found some random ones to replace or upgrade, I have these. These are truck lug nut sockets, so they're 1.5 inches for the outer nut, and then inside they have you can just see that they have the 13/16 square for removing the stud on the inner of the dualies. This is an ASC, and this thing is just like a trove of steel. This solid wall is all the way down, and that socket probably weighs 3 or 4 pounds. And then I have this Blackhawk, which is more like a traditional deep well. It's a 1.5 inch, but it also is a spud nut socket. It just happens to lend itself to being used as a regular deep well. A little better than this one. A couple of deep well spud nut sockets. We have these down here. I've had these for a long time. This is the Sunex 3/4 inch drive impact large Allen socket set. So these go from 17 through 24. I do eventually want to get the fractional set. Talk about the 3/4 inch T-handles. Of course, breaker bars and T-handles the same way. Much less common in 3/4 inch, but I do have a Mac, which I like. What I find interesting is on this Mac 3/4 inch T-handle, the name is stamped on the bar, where on the 1/2 inch one it's stamped on the head. I do have an old Ace Hardware one, which is actually pretty nice. This is like 20, 25 years old, and Ace actually has had some pretty decent tools for a while. A while ago at actually I think it was an estate sale. No, I think I got this from my usual tool shop for cheap. But what we have here, come on camera, is a Craftsman. And don't even see much Craftsman 3/4. I see there's sockets every once in a while, but not ratchets and T-handles. And the last T-handle is this Sweeney, which is actually a aircraft parts manufacturer that had some tooling or hand tools for, particularly with helicopters, hand tools and torque multiplier gearboxes for working on some of the heavy duty high torque fasteners that are on aircraft. This one's interesting because it is a extension handle, or an extension handle T-handle with the T-handle head that can, oh, if I get this out enough, that can slide down. It actually has a detent right at the end to actually keep the head at the end, but you can extend the handle out and use it as a T-handle, and it gives you a bunch of extra leverage, and it really is the nicest T-handle. And some of my viewers have made note of, and a big impetus to have 3/4 inch drive. So when I'm often working on power tools, having to press on bearings or press bushings, and so having all these different sockets, they're really great to find just the right size to press in and out automotive bushings. They're really invaluable like that, as well as for bearings and that type of stuff, whether you're using as overall push tool, or if you're using them just to support something so you can press a bearing out, or maybe you have a shaft and you need to press a bearing on. I found a ton of use for them that way. Also, if you're replacing like front CV shafts in cars, it's always inch and 1/8, inch and 1/4, inch and 3/8. The axle nuts, and a lot of times those tend to be some of the highest torque fasteners on a passenger vehicle. And a lot of people can get away with 1/2 inch drive, but they flex. The breaker bars flex a lot. And when you move up to 3/4 inch drive, you're throwing a lot more steel at it, 50% more steel, and everything's just a lot more rigid, and just no issues removing axle nuts, because those fasteners are pretty small. When it comes to 3/4 inch drive, 2.5 inches, some companies do make really big, like 3-inch sockets, but with Sockerty, you have a range of socket sizes for each drive size, and there's just an upper maximum, and you can see why. Here's a 3/4 inch drive, even that against a 2.5 inch fastener, the drives start getting too small for the bolt that you're working on. You really start risking breaking tooling. This was part of the Weaver. They have this 3/4 inch fractional in 16th master 6-point impact short well socket set, and it actually goes all the way from 3/4 inch through 2.5 by 16ths, and it was a promo item. It was still a pretty decent deal. Buying them, it's like 150 or 170 bucks, and it's just the only time I had really seen it, and surprisingly enough, you know, from people watching my YouTube channel, which I really appreciate, they offered it as a promo item. Here's a Master Mechanic 3/4 inch drive extension. Do not run into much Master Mechanic 3/4 inch stuff, and that's what I have here for extensions. I have like this funky old Sockerty, and even some Chinese knockoffs, which is what this is. But a lot of old Sockerty had through holes, so you could use both like a drive ratchet, but the idea is extensions or the sockets themselves would actually become their own kind of T-handle. So there would be sockets that had these big through holes, and like this extension where you can turn each component into a T-handle and break it with something that's, you know, not going to damage a ratchet, and then just use a ratchet to actually unthread the fastener. And this big tube here, this is an Armstrong. So I've talked about interchangeable head wrenches. They're large. Once wrenches become really large, like 2 inches, 2.5 inches, it's just so heavy and so expensive to have one giant forged wrench, where really you just need a box end or you need an open end. that they make interchangeable heads where it's just the end of the wrench forged with a round plug, and then you have a handle. And that's what this is. This is not just like a piece of conduit. This is a seamless 3/16 wall alloy steel tube. Oh, and here, let me pull this out. I'm not very fond of Titan tools because they don't have a very good warranty. I was a little more excitable about them like 15-20 years ago, but they're just kind of a low quality rebrander. Some of their stuff, like these extensions, are okay. So these Titan had on Amazon on sale. This happens to be a 36-inch or a 3-foot long impact 1/2-inch drive extension. I should also mention that O'Reilly's Auto Parts had a performance tool. That's what the end of these extensions down here are. I don't want to yank them out. But also had ultra long extensions. Now, the nice thing about having ultra long extensions, you can always stack extensions together, but you risk them kind of falling apart depending on how you're trying to use them. Plus, they wobble a bunch. So you are better off having just one long piece of steel. And I remember, like, the first time this thing came in handy was helping somebody work on exhaust manifold gaskets on a Toyota Tundra, and it turned out a little difficult to get the impact wrench in there, you know, pull out the wheel liner and try to get at the gaskets. It's a V8, so the cylinders were facing each wheel. But you could pull off the wheel, and it turns out that you could just use a really long extension and a swivel socket and be able to stand outside of the wheel well with the impact and just reach. You know, you had a straight shot to most of the fasteners with a big long extension and made short work of it. And so that's the way it is with this 3/4 inch. Just real similar to my inch drive drawer. I mean, here's a, you know, one random proto impact extension, 3/4 inch. I have a random newer Armstrong down here. You know, we have whatever this is. This is a newer proto. This is an older proto. 10-inch Sunex, and that's just how I build them up. Here's a Ace Hardware 3/4 inch extension, and just piecemealing, and that's how you end up with a pretty decent set. Did get the big Icon 3/4 inch breaker bar. It is one of the nicest ones that's ever really showed up on a store shelf, and it is a beast. It's actually it's worth the $100 that they want for it. And then I have the Tecton big inverse head 3/4 inch drive breaker bar. It's just at this Icon. I mean, I already had this, so I didn't really need the Icon, but the Icon is just like a scaled up version of their 1/2 inch and 3/8 bars, and really is pretty heavy duty. And then down here is the only thing that doesn't fit in my 3/4 inch drive or my inch drive drawers. I have a Capri version. It's the very same thing as this Tecton, except for it has a 1-inch drive anvil. And the beam is just a little bit thicker on it. So that's what's under there. I actually do have a more traditional proto hinge handle breaker bar, which I was pretty stoked to being able to dig up. And I have exactly 2 3/4 inch drive ratchets, because once again, they do not turn up very often. Really not very often. And most times they're pretty low quality ones. Or people are like, oh, it's a nice old Craftsman 3/4 inch. I want $100 for it, and it's out of my range. But I have a New Britain with the Catus ratchet mechanism in it. Not just a New Britain built. This is actually a New Britain branded one. I was pretty stoked to have picked it up. I was with so many of those Catus ratchets. They do have a lot of anvil play, so I had to put in a shim washer as well as a thick snap ring to replace the spiral ring to tighten that up. And I've done a video on this. And down here I have my one pair head, which is a Williams, and I got that for a deal because the handle on it's bent, like it got run over, but it works fine. And speaking of difficulty, more random sockets are like 6-point chrome, which is very uncommon. Almost all 3/4 inch chrome is 12-point, and that's what this whole set all the way back here. Plus I have some random stuff like some kind of specialty fastener there. I've got some of my drag link sockets, big giant 3/4 inch drive ones, which I got a Mac and a couple of snap-ons. I don't have many. I gotta get this out of the way. I wish these drawers opened up all the way. One of the worst things. Got an old school snap-on one here. These are neat. A lot of 3/4 inch and more so on 1-inch drive, they actually have detent pins, which are straight wall pins that go in and lock into the socket. And so many sockets that are designed to work with that kind of tooling have a little ramp, so you don't have to, so it slides into the socket, and a little push button to make it easily releasable. Never mind, this is an old Bonnie here. That would be hard to find a whole Bonnie set of these, but this is a big old 1 1/4 inch 8-point socket. Thought if I ever run into one of those, you know, you're just stuck using a big adjustable wrench, but it's so much handier if you have a socket. So I was kind of stoked to have found that just because of how rare big Bonnie tools are. And yes, I got to nest them to get everything to fit in place. Lots of smaller things I nest, such as, you know, reducers, which is one of the things that I do also find from Snap-on, just because it's a reducer. They end up beating around a toolbox, and it's just some reducer, and people really don't notice that it's a Snap-on. So I have that version, and I have the 2-piece version. So both of the nice Snap-on ones. And I think, oh yeah, so this is a Proto. Here's the detent pin that I was talking about here. Pretty heavy duty Proto. Funny that Proto on all of them, not guaranteed on all their reducers. The same thing goes for these are just simply increasers, some Snap-on, some junkier ones, some stubby extensions like a Proto. That's also a Snap-on there. So I'm doing okay. I have like a Gray's pneumatic. This is the 3/4 inch drive constant velocity impact swivel universal. Very handy with the kind of forces that are involved with 3/4 inch. Is many times you'll use a more traditional universal, and this is a 3/4 inch power belt. Really, you can see this massive universal joint. But these can get a little funky because of the way they have 2 pivots on them, and they can kind of want to bind up. They can get around the tighter spaces, but you just get a lot smoother action out of the constant velocity, and even have a more compact and old school SK. Took me a long time to find these universal joints. I had a bunch of 3/4 inch sockets before I ever got a U-joint. And I guess that just about does it. The reason my chrome 12 points, I mean, they're 12 point because you have on these larger fasteners, it's less of a worry of stripping something out with a 12 point. There, of course, are 12 point large fasteners, like BMW axle nuts are 12 point, as well as a lot of big 12 points on diesel, etc. But you tend to deal with such large and long tooling that it makes much more of a difference to have that 30-degree arc swing versus a 60-degree arc swing. And so that's how I built up my whole 3/4 inch drive set. You know, this is a Riot 1 1/8, and it's just been a socket here, a socket there. I think I have one Snap-on there. These taller ones, Proto, for a long time, for some reason, their 3/4 inch chrome sockets were like in between short wound depot. What they had, their idea was, is actually because of so much of their business is commercial customers did not want to buy sets of deep well and short well. That Proto actually came out, the Proto sockets were like mid-length because they were like the best of both worlds, and I found quite a few of them. That's these tall ones here, including some pretty large ones. Most of the large stuff is Proto. I do run into that brand more reliably than any other when it comes to the heavier tooling. I mean, they really do have some pretty dominant sales in the heavy hand tools markets. So I really appreciate everybody who's been watching and helping support the channel. And yeah, all this steel is heavier than that inch drive drawer. I don't know by how much, but I know it's a fair amount. Because when I look at the slides, you can see how they're bowing out, wanting to buckle, and they're double slides. There, you can see it better there. I mean, they really want to pop off those rails. This is, you know, getting a little bit sketchy. This drawer falls on your feet, you have broken feet. So that's the deal. 3/4 inch drive takes years to really build up, you know, a usable and comprehensive set. Especially when you're trying to find used stuff, just because there's just a whole lot less supply of it. But with just some patience and determination. I mean, when I started out, I had just a few chrome sockets and a T-handle and like a terrible Chinese ratchet. And yeah, it's taken me 15, 20 years to build all this up, but now it's a pretty awesome set. So whenever I need to work on a large fastener, oftentimes, maybe inside I've taken apart a few transmissions. They're a large diameter, but not very high torque and not very thick nuts. And once again, how they really have shown their value, besides, running into any axle nut or suspension bolt or sub-chassis bolt, etc. This deals with it. Although I do need a better impact wrench for a 3/4 inch. The way they work as dies or punches and anvils, quote unquote, for working with bushings, especially automotive, it's great. I've always been able to find just the right set of sockets to be able to easily push the bushings in and out and make them pretty quick work. Plus, heavy socketry is just always fun. Anyway, thanks for watching.